In the closing years of the 41st millennium, the Imperium of man stood on the brink of annihilation. Abaddon, the despoiler's 13th Black Crusade, had ravaged the Cadian Gate. The fortress, world of Cadia, was destroyed despite the heroism of its defenders. In its wake, reality itself was rent asunder. The birth of the Great Rift, a vast warp storm known as the Cicatrix Maledictum, tore the galaxy in two. This galaxy-spanning maelstrom severed whole sectors from the light of the Astronomicon. An era of literal darkness the Imperium calls the blackness or Noctis Aeterna. Isolated and besieged, countless worlds were cut off and overwhelmed by demonic incursions and rampant heresy. The Imperium had not known peril of this magnitude since the Horus Heresy 10 millennia before. Its armies were spread thin and reeling, astropathic communication was all but silenced, and for many, hope was nearly lost. Within this despair, scattered heroes fought to stem the tide. On Cadia's ashes, the living Saint Celestine had kindled faith during the desperate last stand. Tech priest Belisarius Cawl, bearing secret knowledge and artifacts of ages past, escaped the cataclysm alongside survivors of the beleaguered imperial forces. By unlikely fortune or providence, these imperial refugees found unexpected allies in a coalition of Eldar. Leading them was Yvraine, emissary of the Eldar god of the dead, Ynnari, who believed that the fate of both their races hinged on resurrecting an ancient champion. As the galaxy was sundered and the Emperor's loyal subjects prayed for deliverance, a plan was set in motion to return one of the Emperor's own demigod sons to the realm of the living. For nearly 10,000 years, the Ultramarines Primarch Roboute Guilliman had lain in stasis on Macragge, felled by a mortal wound during his final duel with the Daemon Primarch Fulgrim. Guilliman's body was preserved at the very brink of death, entombed upon a throne in the Temple of Correction, a shimmering stasis field arresting time around him. He sat unmoving, his armor still scarred by Fulgrim's poisoned blade, and across his knees rested a mighty relic, the Emperor's own sword, placed there in honor of the fallen Primarch. For centuries, pilgrims traveled to Guilliman's shrine, praying for a miracle. Few truly believed a legend that his wounds were slowly healing within the stasis glow. Yet many kept vigil in the hope that the avenging sun might one day rise again. Unbeknownst to all but a secret few, Guilliman himself had prepared for this dire day long ago. In the time before the Battle of Thessala, the clash with Fulgrim that nearly killed him, Guilliman had charged Archmagos Belisarius Cawl with a solemn task. Should the Primarch fall, Cawl was to find a way to revive him. For 10 millennia, the tech priest labored in secret, obsessively pursuing two great works at Guilliman's behest: the creation of a new, superior breed of space marines, and the arcane science needed to heal a Primarch's grievous wounds. Now, as the Imperium crumbled, Cawl marshaled every artifice at his disposal to fulfill his ancient oath. Guided by Yvraine and her Eldar followers, Cawl and a retinue of Imperial survivors traversed the webway to reach Macragge. Their arrival ignited as much suspicion as hope. Chapter Master Marnius Calgar and the Ultramarines initially met this Xenos-aided pilgrimage with grave misgivings. In the holiest chamber of the fortress of Hera, amidst the pulsing machinery keeping Guilliman in eternal repose, Cawl unveiled his labor of centuries, the armor of fate, a custom-built suit of power armor whose advanced systems could regenerate even Fulgrim's lethal handiwork. Yet, as Yvraine revealed, technology alone would not suffice. Guilliman's body could be mended, but his soul lingered on the threshold of death. His technology would have healed your physical wounds, Roboute, but the worst damage had been done to your soul, Yvraine later explained. So no, Primarch, it is by the grace of Ynnari that you stand once more amongst the living. The Eldar Witch proposed a desperate measure, The stasis field must be shut down, allowing Guilliman to truly die, so that she, channeling the divine power of Ynnari, could resurrect him. This suggestion horrified Calgar. "No Xenoswitch would ever lay hand upon the Primarch while I draw breath," he swore. Tensions in the shrine ran high as Space Marines, Inquisitor Greyfax, and even a Black Templar's Marshal drew weapons, some ready to die rather than see alien sorcery touch their gene-sire. But others vouched for this last hope. Saint Celestine herself beseeched them to have faith, and Chief Librarian Tigurius spoke of prophetic visions foreseeing this moment. Reluctantly, Calgar yielded to the plan, for the alternative was the Imperium's doom. At that very moment, catastrophe struck. Traitor forces, sensing the power stirring on Macragge, launched a brazen assault on the fortress of Hera. The Black Legion spearheaded the attack, shattering the shrine's dome with drop pods and gunships, even as arguments raged within. Bolters roared, and blades clashed around Guilliman's throne. The Emperor's sanctum profaned by chaos in a desperate bid to slay the Primarch forever. With time and options exhausted, Cawl and Yvraine enacted the resurrection in the midst of the battle. At Tigurius's shouted signal, Yvraine's sword sliced through the cabled conduits feeding the stasis field. The life-sustaining glow around Guilliman dissipated in an instant. The Primarch gasped a final, faltering breath as the poison in his veins ran its course. Guilliman, for a heartbeat, was truly dead. Cawl's masterwork, the great auto-reliquary, whirred to life, its mechanisms enveloping Guilliman's throne in a flurry of golden light and blessed machinery. Eldritch energies coalesced with Imperial science. Those present could only continue the furious fight against the invaders and pray. The Gathering Storm campaign book later described Guilliman's resurrection as being achieved by arcane imperial artifice and fell Xenos sorcery, a fusion of Cawl's technological genius and Yvraine's psychic grace. Within that armored cocoon, the Primarch's mortal wounds knit back together, flesh and bone restored by the armor of fate, even as Yvraine's spirit song beckoned his soul to return. After tense moments that felt like an eternity, Cawl's machine chimed a pure note and its armatures folded open. A figure stepped forth from the dispersing haze of life support vapor and halo of light. Roboute Guilliman lived once more. The scene that followed has already passed into legend. Guilliman arose at the very moment the Black Legion breached his sanctum. The newly revived demigod was clad in ornate blue armor, wreathed in golden sigils, the completed armor of fate, fresh from Mars. And in his hand he gripped a blazing sword that could only have come from the Emperor's own armory. Those traitors nearest the throne faltered at the sight. Where once had sat a deathly, pale relic, now stood a wrathful son of the Emperor incarnate. Guilliman's gaze burned with righteous fury, and with a roar he hurled himself at the foe. The Primarch struck with speed and strength far beyond any mortal. His first swing of the Emperor's sword cleaved a charging Khorne berserker in twain, the relic blade shearing power armor and daemon-forged flesh with equal ease. Bolt rounds and lost fire that had moments ago slaughtered Guilliman's defenders now pattered harmlessly from his armor's inviolable plates. Witnesses say Guilliman moved as a figure of myth, a whirlwind of death in cerulean and gold. A bolt of azure psychic lightning from a chaos sorcerer crackled toward him. Guilliman answered with the thunder of the Hand of Dominion, his mighty gauntlet, and obliterated the heretic in a storm of detonating ammunition. He gunned down traitors with bursts from his wrist-mounted bolters, then smashed into the enemy's elite terminators head-on, shattering them with titanic blows. In moments, the shrine of Guilliman became a slaughterhouse of chaos. The newly reborn Primarch and his allies tore the heart from the Black Legion strike force. Those few traitors not cut down tried to flee, but none escaped the fortress of Hera alive that day. When the smoke cleared, Ultramar's defenders beheld a scene they could scarcely believe. Roboute Guilliman, alive and victorious, standing amid the bodies of the Emperor's foes. As cheers and prayers rose in the blood-scented air, Marneus Calgar knelt before his gene-sire in awe. Though battered from the fight, the chapter master offered Guilliman the chapter's fealty and command without question. All around, battle-weary Ultramarines and mortal soldiers dropped to their knees in adoration of the Primarch reborn. But Guilliman's own thoughts were far from triumphant. He was a man out of time. 10 millennia of darkness had fallen since his last waking memory, a desperate battle against a tainted brother, his ill-fated duel with Fulgrim. Now he found himself in a barbaric age, surrounded by warriors who treated him as a living idol. In that moment, the freshly resurrected Primarch saw not only relief and worship in the eyes of his followers, but also the shadows of ignorance and superstition that had grown thick over the Imperium in his absence. Guilliman wasted no time assuming command. Even as he was still coming to grips with the enormity of what had transpired, he learned the full scale of the crisis gripping the galaxy. Guilliman received terse reports of the Cicatrix Maledictum's horrific spread, and of Terra itself, now cut off behind raging warp storms. The state of his father's realm appalled him. Decay, superstition, and ignorance had supplanted the enlightened empire he once knew. The Ultramarines and their chapter serfs had come to deify the Emperor as a god, despite the Emperor's own stern opposition to such faith. In every aspect of society and war, Guilliman perceived stagnation and dogma choking mankind's progress. The Primarch, a staunch proponent of rationality and imperial truth, was revolted by what millennia of desperation had wrought. Later, in a rare moment of candid anguish, Guilliman would muse that, if the Emperor himself stood up, came down off his golden throne, and proclaimed, "I am not a god," then they would burn him as a heretic. Such was the grim irony of the Imperium's spiritual decay, a burden Guilliman now felt pressed upon his shoulders. After convening a war council with Chapter Master Calgar and the leaders of Ultramar, Guilliman resolved on a bold course. He would travel to Terra to seek out the Emperor on the Golden Throne. Only by consulting his father directly could Guilliman hope to find a way to save humanity from impending doom. Despite just awakening from his long stasis, the Primarch moved swiftly. He assumed overall command of all Imperial forces in Ultramar and ordered preparations for a crusade to cut through the warp storms to Terra. This expedition, which history would remember as the Terran Crusade, gathered not only Guilliman's Ultramarines, but also a coalition of those who had aided in his resurrection. The entourage included Belisarius Cawl and his Mechanicus cohorts, the living Saint Celestine and her devoted warriors, the Eldari of Rain and her sworn swords, a detachment of Grey Knights led by Grand Master Voldus, Inquisitor Greyfax of the Ordo Hereticus, and even the enigmatic fallen angel known as Cypher. It was an improbably diverse alliance united by one goal: escort the Primarch through hell itself to reach the throne world. From the outset, the Chaos Gods conspired to thwart Guilliman's journey. The newborn Great Rift roiled with unnatural wrath at the Primarch's revival. As Guilliman's fleet traversed the warp, guided at times by Eldar webway routes, the powers of the Imperium threw one trial after another in his path. Near the warp rift, known as the Maelstrom, the Crusade was ambushed by a vast force of traitors and daemons. Magnus the Red, the daemon Primarch of the Thousand Suns, and Guilliman's once brother, orchestrated a trap of fiendish cunning. The fleet was drawn into a shifting labyrinth of warp storms. Reality and illusion bled together as Magnus and his sorcerers attacked, aided by the Crimson King's ally Kairos Fateweaver, a two-headed Lord of Change. In a nightmarish battle amid the Imperium, Guilliman's forces were shattered and scattered. The Primarch himself became ensnared by a psychic trap. Clinging spectral chains, forged from Guilliman's own doubts and regrets, bound him in torment within a pocket dimension inside a blackstone fortress. All seemed lost. The Imperial expedition was on the brink of annihilation, deep in the Sea of Souls. Yet, salvation arrived from unlikely quarters. Cypher and a troop of Eldar Harlequins, led by the Shadow Seer, Silandri Veilwalker, mounted a daring rescue mission. Exploiting the arrogance of Fate Weaver and the distraction of the raging warp, these unlikely heroes infiltrated the Blackstone prison and freed Guilliman from his sorcerous chains. The Primarch, rekindling hope in his warriors, fought his way clear of Magnus's trap. Though battered and greatly reduced in number, the survivors escaped into the webway just as the warp gates collapsed behind them. The Terran Crusade had paid a heavy toll in blood, but Guilliman still lived, and where there's the Emperor's will, there is hope. The battered expeditionary force emerged from the webway on the moon of Luna, within the Sol system itself. However, the Chaos Gods had not given up their quarry. Hot on Guilliman's heels, Magnus the Red forced his way through a portal onto Luna, determined to finish what he had begun. Under the cold light of Terra's moon, Primarch faced Primarch in a duel of mythic proportions. Guilliman, wielding the Emperor's flaming sword, struck out at Magnus with all the wrath of the avenging Crusader. But Magnus was empowered by the warp and nearly Guilliman's equal in martial skill. The traitor sorcerer, King unleashed gouts of kaleidoscopic warp, fire, and psychic onslaughts that drove Guilliman to his knees. It seemed the newly resurrected son of the Emperor might be struck down before ever setting foot on Terra. At that pivotal moment, help arrived from Terra. Emperor knows how, word of Guilliman's approach had reached the Imperial Palace, and the defenders of the Sol system responded. Sisters of Silence, the Null Maidens whose very presence blanks out psychic powers, deployed to Luna alongside elite Imperial forces. The Sisters of Silence fell upon Magnus's Rubric's sorcerers, muzzling the warp energies that sustained them. In that same instant, Guilliman felt the shadow of the Emperor's true might flow through him. Rising to his feet, he seized the advantage. With one mighty stroke, Roboute Guilliman impaled Magnus with the Emperor's sword, driving the burning blade through the Daemon Primarch's unnatural flesh. Howling with fury, Magnus was banished back into the warp in a blaze of light as the webway gate on Luna was sealed shut behind him. The path to Terra was finally clear. Roboute Guilliman, the first loyal Primarch to walk the material galaxy in 10,000 years, had come home. Guilliman's arrival on Terra was a moment of both joy and crisis. Across the throne world, word spread like wildfire that a living Primarch, a son of the Emperor, had returned. For the demoralized defenders of the Imperium's heart, it was nothing short of a miracle. But Guilliman did not pause to indulge in adulation or pomp. Accompanied by the Adeptus Custodes, Captain General Trajan Valoris, he made immediately for the Imperial Palace. His goal was the inner sanctum, the Eternity Gate and the Golden Throne beyond it. In the Sanctum Imperialis, Guilliman was finally reunited with his father, or at least with what remained of the Emperor's essence bound to the Golden Throne. It is said the Emperor stirred from his reverie for the first time in millennia at Guilliman's approach. What transpired in that fateful audience is known to few and recorded by none. Even Guilliman's own recollections are clouded and incomplete. The Lord of Ultramar knelt before the Master of Mankind, and those present observed that the Emperor's corpse-like visage briefly shone with unnatural light. Guilliman experienced a direct psychic communion with the Emperor, a silent, mind-to-mind exchange that lasted only moments, yet imparted revelations that would scar Guilliman's soul. In that surreal confrontation, the Emperor, now a near-inhuman psychic entity, impressed upon Guilliman the unimaginable stakes of the current war and the burden that the Primarch must bear. Guilliman staggered from the throne room and collapsed, the ordeal leaving him physically and mentally overwhelmed. To the custodians and officers who rushed to his aid, it appeared the Primarch had conversed with the Emperor for only minutes, but over a day had passed by the time Guilliman regained his full senses. Whatever truths the Emperor imparted, they were dark and terrible indeed. Guilliman emerged from the Emperor's presence resolved and grim, convinced that he, as the last loyal son, carried the sole mandate to save humanity. Wasting no time, Roboute Guilliman assumed the title of Lord Commander of the Imperium, reclaiming the authority he had held in the dark days after the Horus Heresy. In council with the High Lords of Terra, whom he pointedly reminded of their duty to serve, not rule, the Emperor's will, Guilliman enacted sweeping changes. He declared himself the Emperor's living regent, the acting hand of his will. Many long-entrenched imperial institutions were forced to bend to the returned Primarch's commands. Some did so gladly, others with sullen resentment. Guilliman cared little for their pride. He saw the Imperium's ruling apparatus as bloated and half-blind, mired in bureaucratic infighting, even as the universe burned. The Codex Astartes author now turned his talent for organization to the Imperium as a whole. He initiated a storm of reforms and decrees, later codified in the new Codex Imperialis, to streamline governance and direct all efforts towards survival. Before these reforms could fully take root, the war came literally to Terra's doorstep. The eruption of the Great Rift had allowed a mass daemon incursion into the Segmentum Solar. While Guilliman marshaled fleets and armies to reinforce the embattled sectors, a host of Khorne's bloodletters and demonic engines assaulted Terra itself in what became known as the Second Battle of Terra. The Lord Commander met this threat head-on. At the Lion's Gate spaceport and along the broken walls of the Imperial Palace, Guilliman fought in person alongside the Adeptus Custodes and Battle Sisters, banishing the blood god's fiends in bloody drifts of ectoplasmic ash. Terra was held by the narrowest margin, thanks largely to Guilliman's generalship and the unyielding inspiration his presence instilled. The success was a badly needed proof that the Imperium was not yet broken. Its leadership had a rallying point again, a warlord who could unite imperial forces on a scale not seen since the Great Crusade. With Terra secured, for the moment, Guilliman wasted no time in executing the plan he and the Emperor had doubtless discussed in the throne room. The time had come to reclaim the Imperium from the brink of apocalypse. In 999, M41, mere weeks after his resurrection, Guilliman proclaimed the launch of the Indomitus Crusade, a grand campaign to liberate and fortify the war-torn Imperium. The name Indomitus, meaning untamed or unyielding, was a defiant statement. Despite the galaxy's descent into madness, the Imperium would not lie down and die. Guilliman assumed supreme command of this crusade, assembling the greatest mobilization of Imperial forces since the Horus Heresy. Every available Navy battle fleet, Titan Legio, Astra Militarum Regiment, Adeptus Sororitas Order, and Space Marine Chapter was called upon to send support. Most significant of all, Belisarius Cawl unveiled the primogenitor of Guilliman's second charge, the Primarch's secret project to create a new legion of transhuman warriors. From hidden vaults on Mars and Terra, Cawl released the newly forged Primaris Space Marines, thousands of advanced Space Marines engineered with improved gene seed and war gear. Warriors that Guilliman had envisioned as a new hope for humanity's future. These Primaris Marines, organized into fresh armies called the Unnumbered Sons, joined the Indomitus fleets and were gradually integrated into existing chapters, greatly bolstering the Imperium's fighting strength. To the common citizen, it was as if angels' reinforcements had descended from on high, led by an avenging demigod, to turn back the tides of damnation. For several standard years, the Indomitus Crusade burned across the stars. Guilliman directed the vast war effort with peerless strategic acumen, often commanding multiple war zones at once through astropathic communication and delegating trusted chapter masters and imperial commanders as his proxies. The Crusade's objectives were twofold. First, to relieve and reinforce those worlds cut off by the Great Rift, particularly in the segmentums Pacificus and Ultima, which had been plunged into the darkness of the so-called Imperium Nihilus, the Dark Imperium. Second, to re-establish stable roots and bastions that might reconnect the sundered halves of the galaxy. Early on, Guilliman's forces secured the Nachmund Gauntlet, a rare corridor of calmer warp space near the Eye of Terror, which provided a tenuous passage through the raging storm. Through such pathways, the Crusade armadas pushed into isolated zones, bringing salvation to worlds that had thought themselves forever lost. Where the Crusade arrived, it was as if the Emperor's own wrath had descended. Heretic warlords and Xenos raiders besieging imperial planets found themselves caught between orbital bombardments from Battlefleet Gothic above and drop pods of Adeptus Astartes crashing down into their strongholds. Time and again, Guilliman's arrival turned near defeat into victory. Entire sectors were liberated world by world, the Primarch's forces sweeping away Chaos insurgents, repelling Orc-Waz and purging Genstealer cults that had festered during the darkness. One famous engagement was the Plague Wars in Ultramar, where elements of the Crusade under Guilliman's personal command fought the demonic legions of Nurgle to save the realm of Ultramar. This would later be chronicled in the Dark Imperium novels, though those events unfolded slightly after the main Crusade timeframe. In countless other war zones, Armageddon, Baal, Vigilus, and more, Guilliman's Crusade armies either directly intervened or empowered local forces with new Primaris reinforcements and material support. Each victory was hard-won, paid for in the blood of heroes, but slowly the bleeding of the Imperium began to staunch. As the Crusade progressed, Guilliman reorganized imperial military structure to better respond to the new threats, creating new chapters from the unnumbered suns, establishing the bastions and Primarch's scar supply routes, and instituting reforms that emphasized flexibility and rapid response over the hidebound dogma that had plagued imperial forces. His Codex Imperialis would serve as a blueprint for governing a wartime imperium, updating antiquated edicts from the Horus Heresy era for this grim new age. After approximately midnight of the 42nd millennium, the Crusade's exact length is a matter of some revised records, initially a century, later adjusted to about a decade in newer chronicles. The Indomitus Crusade was declared formally complete. Guilliman had reclaimed or re-garrisoned much of the Imperium Sanctus, the light side of the rift, and pushed aid as far as possible into Imperium Nihilus. Crucially, stable routes like the Nachmund Gauntlet remained open, allowing continued travel and reinforcement between the halves of the sundered galaxy. The Ultima Segmentum, Guilliman's own domain, was largely secured, though at terrible cost, and never permanently, for the enemies of man are innumerable. Guilliman eventually chose to halt the Crusade and redistribute his forces, lest they overextend. The Imperium's resources, though vast, were not infinite. He returned to Ultramar to confront a major Death Guard invasion, led by his traitorous brother, Mortarion, leaving the Crusade's later stages to be completed by capable subordinates. Even so, the Indomitus Crusade had undeniably turned the tide. What had seemed an absolute apocalypse following Cadia's fall was now, if not quite stabilized, at least a winnable war. World by world, the ideals of the Emperor were being defended and rebuilt, and Guilliman's leadership had proven instrumental in this grand effort. Culturally and spiritually, Guilliman's presence had profound effects. In him, many citizens saw a living saint or even a demigod. His very existence was a contradiction of the imperial creed, a Primarch who openly questioned the worship of the Emperor, even as millions hailed him as the Emperor's divine instrument. Guilliman walked a careful line. He upheld the faith of the common folk when needed to inspire hope, but within the halls of power he championed a return to the Emperor's secular ideals. He strengthened institutions like the Inquisition and Adeptus Custodes to keep the imperial cult's excesses in check. But he did not, and perhaps could not, openly shatter the deeply ingrained religious devotion of the masses. The grim-dark tone of this new age was perhaps best captured by Guilliman's own conflicted musings, recorded in the aftermath of the Crusade. He fights not only against the Imperium's external enemies, but against what the Imperium has become in his absence. It is a burden he shoulders with somber resolve, for, as the Emperor told him, he is mankind's last hope. Militarily, the Imperium emerged from the Indomitus Crusade, bloodied but unbroken. The geographic split of the Great Rift remains. The Imperium Nihilus still languishes without the Astronomican's light, beset by constant invasion. But Guilliman's forces ensured that major stable corridors exist, and that the Imperium remains a single civilization, not two doomed halves. The Space Marines were forever changed by the introduction of the Primaris. Guilliman's own Ultramarines and their successors were the first to integrate these new battle brothers, who proved their worth many times over during the Crusade. In the years since, every chapter has been offered Primaris reinforcements, an effort that continues to shore up defenses on every front. The Grey Shields of the Unnumbered Suns have since been formed into new chapters, fulfilling Guilliman's plan to bolster humanity's angels of death for the battles to come. Those battles are far from over. As the 42nd millennium unfolds, Guilliman now turns to face challenges old and new. The returning threat of his traitorous brothers, daemon primarchs like Mortarion and Angron. The rise of new alien empires, and insidious plots such as Abaddon's continued schemes and the whispers of Primarchs yet to reappear. But the legacy of Guilliman's resurrection is that the Imperium of Man now has a future to fight for. What was nearly the end has become, if not a bright new beginning, at least a chance to continue the endless war, to resist the dying of the light a while longer. In the grim darkness of the far future, Roboute Guilliman strides once more at the head of the Emperor's armies, a relic of a bygone age now living in a galaxy of endless war, bearing the burden of both salvation and the stark truth of humanity's frailty. His resurrection is a tale of unlikely alliances and supreme sacrifice, of ancient science mingled with forbidden sorcery. It is strictly canon, a miracle and a weapon all at once. And though Guilliman would be the first to insist he is no divine savior, billions of souls across the Imperium now offer prayers of thanks for the Primarch's return. In the era of the Indomitus Crusade, the Imperium has been battered and humbled, but under Guilliman's leadership, it refuses to yield. Thus the avenging sun marches onward, a somber and resolute guardian for mankind in a galaxy consumed by darkness, until the Emperor's last enemy is cast down, or until Roboute Guilliman himself falls for the final time.